Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Now in today's lecture, we're going to discuss one of the most important concepts of positioning in CSS, and that is the property of float. Now float is basically used a lot in any kind of web development to position something, to basically move something on the left side or to the right side of your screen, and to basically just align any bunch of divs or something like that onto your screen in a certain format or in a certain pattern. So we're going to discuss that how does the float property works and how does it help us position something in CSS. So without wasting any further time, let's begin. Alright guys, so as you can see that I have already created an HTML file over here, and now we are going to try to understand the concept of float. So to understand that, first we are going to create a structure. We're going to create two divs, and then we will try to position it on different locations on the screen, and we're going to see that how can float help us do that. So now what we are going to do is we are going to add a div over here, and we are going to give this an ID of first, and then we are going to write a paragraph of, let's say, lorem 80 over here. So we're going to get a dummy paragraph of 80 words basically. Now since we're done with that, we are going to add another div, and we are going to give this one an ID of second, and now we are going to add a paragraph of lorem 40 over here, for example. So now what do? I basically, now I'm going to go ahead and open up a style sheet, and I'm going to give this some width, height, and background color over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the first one over here, so hashtag first, and then we're going to give it a width of 500 pixels and a height of 350 pixels, let's say. Now I'm going to put let's not put a background color, but let's give it a border over here of 2 pixel solid brown, for example. So now we have this one, so let's just go ahead and do the same thing for the second one as well. So I'm going to write second over here, and then we are going to do the same thing. I'm going to change the width to something smaller this time. The height is going to be, I think, the same, and then we are going to add a border over here that is going to be 2 pixel solid, and I'm going to change the color to something else. Now let's just go back and just try to refresh this, and you will see that this is how these two divs appear. So you can see that how the divs are appearing over here. We have the first div over here, the second div basically below it. So that is how divs appear by default. They appear on top of each other, they don't appear next to each other. So you might want to do that. So how will you basically, let's say if you have to move the second div or the first div on the right side of the screen, then what would you do, right? So if I want to say, let's say I want to move the second one on the extreme right over here, what do I use? So I'm going to go back, and I'm basically just simply going to write over here float right. So now you can actually see that you don't really have to give it any kind of margins, and you don't really have to figure out how much margin left would you need to move it to the other side. You can simply write float right over here, and as I go back and refresh, you can see that the div goes all the way to the right side of the screen. Now I know how to do this, but what if I want to go up and I want to move this div right next to this one? So they both should be on the same line basically. Now in that case, I will have to give this div a float property as well. Now of course I don't want it to go to the right side, so I can just give it a property of float left over here. So let me just show you what happens when I do that. I'm going to remove the float right from here for now, and now I'm going to go back and refresh. So now we are basically where we just started before, and I'm going to give this div a float left, and I want to show you what happens when I do that. So when I go back and I give the first one a float left over here, and now when I save it and I go back and I refresh it, you will basically notice that the div that was over here moved on the top. The content is over here because there is a reason for that, because the content cannot overlap this text. So it is basically appearing after the text, where you have the space where the text is not there, then the text is appearing below the div over here. So now whenever you will use a float left like this, both the divs are going to overlap. So that is completely normal. Don't worry about it. Now you can see that this second div is on the top now, right? It is where the first one is. So now what I can do is I can use the second div to go to the right side. So I can tell the second div to go to the right side of the screen, and they both will be aligned on a single line, right? So now when I go back and I give my second div a float right this time, So what will happen, I'll just go back and refresh it, and you can basically see now they're on a single line. So what did you do? First of all, you added a float left on the first div so that the second div could go up, right? Once the second div moved upwards, then you use the float right to the second one to move it over here. So that is one way that you can actually use the float properties, and you can basically move something. Now, similarly, if you want this div to be over here on the right next to the first one, you don't want it to be on the extreme right, for example. So in that case, what you would do is you would simply go back, and now you will just write float left over here as well. And now when you go back and you refresh it, so you will see that it comes right next to it. Now, if you want some gap over here, of course, you can add some margin left over here or margin right. So you can go over here and we can just add a margin left of, we're adding it in the second one. So margin left of, let's say 30 pixels over here. And now when I go back and I refresh, so there you go. Now you have some space over here. So now similarly, I can have a third div over here as well. So let me just copy paste the first one over here and paste it below the second one. So I'm going to paste this over here, and I'm going to change the the ID to third over here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we are going to write hashtag third. And now we're going to give it a width of, let's say 500 pixels. We can give it a height of 350 pixels, and we can give it a border of, let's say 2 pixel solid and maybe orange over here. So without giving it any kind of float or nothing like that, let's just go ahead and see that how does it appear by default. So now if I just simply go back and if I just refresh this, so yes, so now you can see that the orange one is basically overlapping over here. So your orange div, it's hard to see right now, but let me just zoom in. Okay, but right now it's kind of hard to see because the orange div is behind this first div over here, right? So this is what is happening right now. So the orange div is over here. Now, if you want to make it go to the right side over here, then you're simply going to use float right. So if I go back right now and I simply go to the third one and use over here, I've got to add a semicolon. Okay, now if I use float right over here, and now if I save it and I go back and I refresh it, then there you go. It goes to the right side. And if I want it to again align on the left side over here, then that is pretty simple as well. All I need to do is just simply go back again, and now I can just simply write over here float left. And as I do it, I can go back and refresh again. It is on the left side. Now to add some distance, I can add some margin left over here. So if you add some margin left over here, let's say of 30 pixels, for example, and now you save this, you go back, you refresh it. So there you go. So that is basically how your float properties work. And this is how you can use a float property to position something on the left or the right side. Now, again, float cannot really help you position something exactly in the center or somewhere in the middle, nothing like that. But we have a lot of videos coming up on the positioning that are going to help you achieve all of that. So the float is only useful whenever you're trying to move something on the left, something on the right, trying to create some kind of layout basically. So that is when you might want to use the float property. But we are going to learn a lot of other ways, a lot of easier ways to position as well, using a lot of different positioning models that are being offered by CSS. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope that you understood each and everything that we tried to learn today. So today we understood how float properties work in CSS and how you can move something on the left side, on the right side of the screen, and how you can align some divs, and basically you can just align some containers together right next to each other. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.